When you walk into a fast food place and you have physical indications that you're either a man or a woman, and the kid behind the counter has to figure out on the spot how to deal with you, what do you do when that kid gets it wrong? Why, you have a temper tantrum, of course, because as a member of the LGBTQXYZ plus oddball club, you're also a leftist. In other words, you're a mess, and you haven't thought of the possibility that you might not have given the poor kid behind the counter enough information, even if he is playing your absurd little game. But you take out your mess on the kid anyway, because you're a leftist, and that's what they do. You spoiled, self-obsessed, egotistical little brat. There's a video out there on the interwebs that's got a lot of views lately. It's about a guy who walks into a fast food joint, and this guy is apparently someone who operates under the notion that he's actually a woman. And so he's got a pair of fake prosthetic breasts, and they're very obvious, but he's got a voice about as deep as mine. And the person behind the counter, apparently, according to this guy who got very upset, the person behind the counter called this guy Sir. And the guy says, "Can't you see I'm a chick? Why do you call a chick with breasts Sir?" And he gets very, very upset, and the guy behind the counter makes a funny pun. He says, "I certainly did not do that." But the point is, apparently the guy behind the counter did call this guy, the customer, Sir. This pretend woman, this fake woman, he called, the man behind the counter called him Sir. And so they go back and forth. And it struck me that here is this customer who approaches the counter in the fast food joint, and he is a contradictory looking person. He's a man with what looks like breasts, and they're very evident. So the guy behind the counter has to think fast. He goes, in his mind, he thinks to himself, how do I deal with this person who's a walking contradiction? Then the customer opens his mouth, and it's obvious that a man's voice comes out, a voice about, again, as deep as mine. Different, but as deep as mine. So now the man behind the counter has a few clues. He sees before him a tall man with a man's voice, a man's face. And let's face it, a man's face is different from a woman's face. A man's face is more square. It's more chiseled. Even when a man is overweight, a man has a man's face versus a woman's face. It's got a man's body. The customer is somewhat tall, so he's not just a typical woman in that regard either. So man's voice, man's face, tall, and then this other contradictory aspect of him, he's got apparently two breasts. And you can't tell because he's wearing a shirt, so they do look like real, normal women's breasts. So what does the guy behind the counter do? Well, the customer assumes that the guy is supposed to assume he's a woman by virtue of the one clue, which is these two breasts. That's all he's got. The guy behind the counter goes, "I've got 5 or 6 different clues that this guy's a dude, and this one clue that contradicts that, which is throwing him up in the air and confusing him, but I've got 5 or 6 different things that say this guy's a dude. I'm going to call him Sir." And so he calls him Sir. This is the problem with today's left. Today's left assumes that they have provided enough information, enough evidence, enough argumentation, such that you will believe what they say is true, and that there is no other possible reality. It's entirely possible, could be, that the customer is a woman trying to become a man, and sir would be to, quote, properly gender the trans man in front of the counter. This all gets very, very confusing. But the point being that the one thing that the employee behind the counter can never know is which way this apparently confusingly configured person is going. Toward the man, and he should say sir, or toward the woman, and he should say ma'am. There's nothing that can tell him that until overtly the customer gives him that little piece of I'm going to say information, except for the fact that if you're a man, you're a man. If you're a woman, you're a woman. You can pretend to be the other thing, that's fine, but you can't change that. There's no changing it. Sorry about that. I mean, I wish that I could somehow wave a magic wand and make it all true, but I can't, nor can you, nor can anyone else. But still, the real point of this is the left can never understand that two things can be true at the same time. One, you, quote, present yourself, end quote, as a woman, and you, quote, identify, end quote, as a woman, and so you think everyone should call you ma'am, whereas you have not given enough information, whereas even if the guy behind the counter is playing your game and wants to cater to your silly notion that you're not as you were born, you have not given him enough information to do that. And this is the problem with the left. It's always true. They never, ever, ever provide actually adequate information, evidence, persuasiveness to allow you to come to their conclusions. And that's because they don't care about that. They come to their conclusions because they come to their conclusions because they want to. They want something, and therefore they believe it must be true. And if you don't believe it, well, then you're a bigot, or you're hateful, or you're this, or you're that. But the left has not given the person enough behind the counter enough information to know which way this person was, quote, transitioning, end quote, with the understanding that you cannot transition. You are who you are. You always will.